By
If you solve
integrating
this,
this
I'll give you my job. She said it laughing, my people. Professor Yewande Cole, the sharpest and proudest mind in the entire mathematics faculty of that great university, said it to a young man in blue overalls holding a mop, and her whole lecture hall of students laughed with her, the way a room always laughs when the powerful make sport of the small. Because the young cleaner, Gideon, had paused. Just paused, his mop still in his hand, and stood looking up at the great blackboard where a problem was written that had defeated that class, and the professor's own graduate students, and the professor herself, for the better part of a term. A problem she had left up there like a trophy of its own difficulty, and the poor boy who emptied their bins had stopped to look at it, really look, with something moving behind his eyes, and Professor Yewande had caught him at it and decided her students needed a laugh.
Well?
She said, folding her arms, playing to the room.
So, you're staring at my board like it owes you money. Please, enlighten us. Share your insight. If you solve this, I'll give you my job.
And the students snickered, and one of them made a joke about the bucket, and a phone came up to film the fun. And Gideon, the young cleaner, looked at her for one long, quiet moment with an expression not one of them could read. And then he leaned his mop against the wall, and he walked to the board, and he picked up a piece of chalk. My people, come closer and sit down, because I need you to see exactly what happened in that hole, and I need you to feel it, because it is the beginning of everything. The boy looked at that board for maybe 5 seconds, his eyes moving across it the way yours move across the face of someone you love. And then he began to write, not hesitating, not guessing. He crossed out a single line near the top, the line everyone had trusted.
They think they can break us,
he said quietly.
I understand
this
now.
Step is wrong.
It has
you
to
pay
close attention to this variable.
Could not be negative. It can. That is why the whole thing collapses.
And from that one correction, his hand moved down the board, clean and sure and fast, and in under a minute, my people, he wrote the last line of a solution to the problem that had beaten a roomful of brilliant, expensive, credentialed people for months. And he set the chalk down in the tray, and he picked up his mop, and he turned to go back to his cleaning. And there was a silence in that lecture hall of a kind those students had never heard, because the professor was staring at the board with the blood draining from her face, because it was right. It was completely, elegantly, undeniably right, and the young man who had just done it was already quietly mopping the floor by the door, as though nothing at all had happened. For a moment, my people, Yewande tried to save herself the way the proud always try first, by refusing to believe it. She stepped to the board, ready to find the floor, ready to laugh again, ready to say, "Ah, but here, you see, the cleaner has made an amateur's mistake." And she followed his working down, line by line, with the whole silent hall watching her face. And there was no mistake. There was only a clarity so clean it was almost insulting, an answer so simple and so right that she could feel, burning up her neck, the shame of every month she and her clever students had walked past it. And the worst part, the part that would keep her awake for nights, was this. It was not that the cleaner was cleverer than her, though perhaps he was. It was that he was humbler than her, humble enough to doubt the one line she had been too proud to question, and that her pride, the very thing she had thought made her superior, was the exact thing that had blinded her. A young man in overalls had just shown an entire lecture hall that the professor's greatest weakness was the thing she was proudest of. And he had not said a single unkind word. He had simply told the truth on the board and picked up his mop. Now, before you cheer, my people, and I know you want to cheer, sit with me, because this is not a story about a clever surprise. It is a story about the most precious thing in the world being locked outside the door and handed a mop, purely because it was born poor, and about who, in that shining hall of learning, was truly educated, and who was truly the fool. Let me tell you who Gideon was. And I warn you, my people, it will make some of you angry, because it is the story of a great mind that a whole system decided it would rather have cleaning its floors than sitting in its chairs. Gideon had been, since he was a small boy, one of those rare people God hands a certain fire in the mind, I do not exaggerate for the sake of the story. In every generation, there are a few born speaking the language of numbers and shapes and logic as naturally as other children speak their mother tongue, and Gideon was one of them. In his poor community school, with broken chalk and torn books, he had outrun every teacher he ever had by the age of 12. They gave him the oldest, hardest textbooks they could find, the ones nobody else could use, just to keep him busy, and he devoured them and came back hungry. One old teacher, seeing what she had in front of her, wept in the staff room because she knew that a mind like this comes to a poor school perhaps once in her whole career, and she was terrified of what the world would do with it. Let me give you one afternoon from that school, my people, so you know exactly what kind of fire we are talking about. That old teacher, half in wonder and half to catch him out, once copied onto the board a problem from her own university days. A hard one, a problem she had struggled over as a grown student, and set it before a class of poor children as a joke, expecting nothing. And Gideon, 12 years old, looked at it and went very still, the way he did, and then raised his hand, not to answer, but to ask shyly whether the teacher had perhaps copied it down wrong, because as written it could be done a much shorter way than the long method her old professor must have intended. And he showed her a cleaner path to the same truth, one she had never seen, one her professor had never shown her, found in 3 minutes by a barefoot boy who had never heard the word university. She did not laugh that day, my people. She went home and sat in the dark, because she had just watched a poor child quietly improve on the work of the learned, and she understood, with a kind of dread, that the world was not built to notice such a thing, that it would ask him not what he could see, but what he could pay. She was right to be terrified, because here is what the world did. Gideon's father died when the boy was 16, and that death did what such deaths do to poor families. It turned a bright future into a bill that had to be paid. There was a mother now with no husband, and a younger sister, and rent and hunger. And there was Gideon, who by every measure of talent had earned a place at that great university, whose examination scores, when he finally sat them, made the markers look twice, but who could no more pay the fees to walk through its doors than he could pay to fly to the moon. There was no money, there were no connections. There was no one to write a letter, to pull a string, to see past the worn clothes to the extraordinary mind inside them. The scholarships went, as they so often do, to children who were already comfortable and already polished, and the poor boy with the finest mind in the city was quietly, politely, invisibly turned away, not because he was not good enough, my people, but because he was not rich enough. And there is no crueler word in the world than a door that says, "You were good enough. You simply could not afford to come in." If you have ever been shut out of a room you had more than earned, turned away not for any lack in you, but only because you were poor, type "locked out" in the comments, because that door is one of the quietest and deepest wounds this world gives, and Gideon stood on the wrong side of it at 16, with the mind of a scholar and the pockets of a beggar. So Gideon did what he had to do. He took work, to feed his mother, to keep his sister in school, because if one of them was going to be schooled, he had decided it would not be him, it would be her. His little sister, my people. Her name was Ngozi, and she was clever too, though not with his terrible brightness, noticed, of course. Children notice everything. She saw her brother come home grey with exhaustion and hand their mother the money, and she saw that there was enough for her school fees and her books, but never anything for his. And one night she asked him, straight, why he did not go to school any more when he was the cleverest person she had ever known. And Gideon he was 17, smiled at her,
and said, "Because I have already had my turn to be clever, and now it is your turn. A family climbs out of a hole one shoulder at a time, and it happens that I am the tallest, so I will stand at the bottom and lift, and you will climb up on me and out. That is not a sad thing, Ngozi. That is what a big brother is for."
And he tucked her in, and then he sat by the candle with a textbook he had pulled from a bin, and taught himself, for the pure love of it, the very things he was paying for her to be taught in the light. He never once let her feel the weight of what he carried. She grew up believing her brilliant brother simply preferred to work, and only understood years later what he had truly done, and wept for a week. And the work he found, my people, and here is the cruelty that is almost too much, the work he found was cleaning that very university, the one that had turned him away. Night after night, he mopped the floors of the lecture halls he was not allowed to sit in. He emptied the bins of professors who did not know his name. He wiped down the blackboards of a learning he was forbidden, by his poverty, to receive. And do you know what he did, my people, alone in those halls at night? He studied. This is the part I need you to hold in your heart. Gideon turned his punishment into his university. Every night, when the students and the professors had gone home, and the great halls were empty and his to clean, Gideon would finish his work, and then, for one stolen hour, he would put down his mop and he would learn. He read the books left behind on the desks. He fished the discarded lecture notes out of the very bins he was emptying, and took them home to a single candle-lit room, and the blackboards, oh, the blackboards. When a professor left a hard problem up overnight, Gideon would stand in front of it in the silent, empty hall, alone, in his overalls, and he would solve it, for no marks, for no degree, for no one, simply because a mind like his must think the way a lung must breathe, and because working those problems in the dark was the only way a locked-out boy could still, somehow, attend the university of his dreams, through the back door, at night, with a mop leaning against the wall. Picture one of those nights, my people. It is well past midnight. The great lecture hall is empty and dim, lit only by the light from the corridor, and silent but for the far-off hum of the city. The floor is clean, Gideon's work is done, and there, on the board, a professor has left a hard problem up from the day's class, and a young man in blue overalls stands alone before it, chalk in his hand, and begins, quietly, joyfully, for no one, to solve it. There is no one to impress, and no one to grade him, and no marks to win. There is only him, and the beautiful hard truth on the board, and the deep private happiness of a mind doing the one thing it was made for. He solves it. He stands back and looks at it for a moment, the way a man looks at a sunset he alone has seen, and then, this is the part that breaks me, my people, he carefully wipes the board clean. He erases his own beautiful work, so that no one will know a cleaner touched it, and he picks up his mop, and he goes home to his candle and his mother and his few hours of sleep. Night after night, year after year, one of the finest minds of his generation solved great problems in an empty hall, and then rubbed them out with his own hand, and told no one, and asked for nothing. If that does not move you, my people, then check that your heart is still beating. For years he did this, my people. For years. He gave himself, in the dark and alone, the entire education the daylight world had denied him, and he grew, in secret, into exactly the scholar that poor weeping teacher had seen in him, only with no one to know it, no paper to prove it, and no chair to sit in. He was never bitter. That is the thing that undoes me about him. He could have hated those students, their easy seats. He did not. He cleaned up after them gently, and he learned from what they left behind, and he was grateful for a job that let him breathe the same air as the mathematics he loved. That, my people, is who Professor Yuanda Cole told to enlighten the room. Now let me tell you about her, because to understand the reckoning that is coming, you must see the two of them side by side. Professor Yewande was genuinely brilliant. I will not take that from her because the truth makes the story stronger. She had studied at great universities, and she had a fast, powerful, capable mind, and she had worked for her place. But somewhere on the climb she had caught the disease that so often infects the gifted and the lettered, the quiet, poisonous conviction that her intelligence made her not just more knowledgeable than other people, but more valuable as a person. She was gracious to those above her and beside her, but to those below, the clerks, the porters, the tea-sellers, the cleaners, she was simply blind, seeing them as furniture, as function, as less than real, the way so very many of the educated are. She would have told you she was not cruel, and she would have believed it. The proud rarely feel their own contempt, they simply breathe it like air. And here, my people, is the first turn of this whole story, so hold it tight. That contempt was not a small private flaw. It was the very reason she could not solve her own problem. Do you see it? Yuanda and her students had failed for months, not for lack of cleverness, but because they were sealed inside their own assumptions, the confident assumptions of people trained to believe they already know. They had all learned the same things, from the same schools, out of the same books, and they all trusted the same wrong line, because it looked like the sort of thing one is supposed to trust, and to doubt it would have felt beneath them. Their pride was not separate from their failure. Their pride was their failure. To find the error, you had to be humble enough to question what every educated person knew, and there was not one humble mind in that hall, except the one holding the mop. Because Gideon had not learned his mathematics in a place that taught him pride. He had learned it alone, from first principles, in the dark, with no professor to tell him which lines were too respectable to question, and no institution to make him feel superior. He had learned it the way the hungry learn, by looking at the actual thing in front of him and asking, plainly, what is really true here, not what am I supposed to believe? He saw the flawed assumption in seconds, because his whole self-taught life had been one long practice of doubting what everyone knew, while they had spent their whole schooled lives learning not to. The cleaner solved it not in spite of being a locked-out, self-taught, poor young man, my people, but because of it. The very poverty that shut him out had kept his mind free. If you have ever been looked straight through, judged as nothing because of the overalls you wear or the work of your hands, type "the cleaner" in the comments, because the world is full of Gideons pushing mops past doors they were born to walk through, and the tragedy is not only what it costs them, it is what it costs a world that throws its finest minds in the bin because they came dressed wrong. So, the board was solved. And now, my people, that hall had a problem far bigger than any equation. Someone had filmed it, of course. And the video of a cleaner in overalls solving in under a minute what a celebrated professor could not solve in a term went where such things go, everywhere. By the next morning it had climbed the whole building and reached the office of the oldest and most respected man in the faculty, Professor Balogun, an emeritus mathematician who had taught for 50 years and had forgotten more than most of his colleagues would ever learn. And Professor Balogun did something that tells you exactly why he was who he was. He did not laugh it off, and he did not rush to defend the dignity of the professor or the propriety of the institution. He sent quietly for the cleaner. And when Gideon stood in his office, mop left outside, overalls still on, quiet and unbowed, the old man did not humiliate him with a test. He was far too wise for that. He simply began to talk to him about mathematics, about the deep, hard, beautiful things at the edges of the subject, and within the hour, my people, Professor Balogun, a great mathematician himself, understood with a slowly rising astonishment and a slowly sinking heart that he was sitting across from the most naturally gifted mind he had met in half a century in the field. A mind with no degree, no paper, no permission, and entirely beyond all of it. He asked the boy gently how he had come to know such things. And Gideon, reluctant, ashamed almost, told him. The father, the scores, the fees he could not pay, the bins, the blackboards at night. And Professor Balogun, an old man not given to tears, had to turn and look out of his window for a long while. Because here is what the old scholar understood in that moment, the thing this whole story is trying to place in your two hands tonight. He understood that his university, his profession, his entire proud lettered world had had this mind in the building the whole time, mopping its floors, emptying its bins, solving its hardest problems alone in the dark, and had not merely failed to teach it. It had turned it away at the door for the crime of being poor, and then hired it to clean the floor of the room it was refused. He understood that the world sorts human beings by all the wrong things, by money, by clothes, by accent, by the letters after a name, and in doing so hurls its actual treasures into the gutter and seats the comfortable and the mediocre in the places of honor. He understood that Gideon was not a charming freak of luck, he was an indictment. A living indictment of every door that had ever been shut on a poor child with a gift, standing there in blue overalls, having taught himself in the dark everything they had refused to give him in the light. Now you are waiting, my people, for the sweet part, for the proud professor to be ruined and for Gideon to be handed her job, exactly as she had so mockingly promised. And I understand the hunger for it, but this story is wiser than that, and so was Gideon, and I need you to see what he actually did, because it is the entire measure of the young man. Professor Balogun offered him everything, not the professor's job, something far greater and far more right, a full place at the university, every fee paid, every door thrown open at last, mentorship, a future, the chance, finally, to become in the daylight the scholar he had already, secretly, become in the dark. And it would have been pure justice, my people. No soul on earth would have begrudged that locked-out boy seizing it with both hands. And Gideon wept, but he did not simply grab it. He asked the old professor for 3 things instead, and each one, my people, will tell you who he was. The first was about the woman who had mocked him. Professor Balogun, angry on his behalf, spoke of having Yuanda disciplined. Her arrogance had shamed a better mind than her own before a laughing room, let her be humbled in turn. And Gideon said no.
If I climb by her fall,
he said quietly,
then I have let her mockery shape me, and I have become a smaller version of her. A person who needs someone beneath him to feel worth something. I did not solve that problem to take her job. I solved it because I could not bear to see a beautiful thing left broken on the board. I want no revenge on her. Revenge is just pride wearing a mask of justice.
Hold that, my people. Given the chance to do to her exactly what she had done to him, the boy she had humiliated refused to let a lifetime of being looked down on turn him, at the last, into someone who looks down. The second thing he asked broke the old man's heart clean open. Balogun had spoken of Gideon's stolen years, his wasted gift, the tragedy of a scholar reduced to a mop. And Gideon gently corrected him.
Do not call it wasted,
he said.
You look at me and see years thrown away, but those nights in the empty halls were not my punishment. They were the happiest hours of my life. I could not afford this university, so I let it teach me anyway, after dark, for free, one blackboard at a time. Every problem you left up overnight, I solved as a gift to myself. You never let me in the door, Professor, so I climbed in the window every single night, and I sat alone in the greatest classroom in the land. My gift did not die in that dark. It grew there. You are not looking at a ruin. You are looking at a graduate of a university that never knew it had a student.
My people, sit with that. The boy the world pitied had, with nothing but a mop and a candle and an unkillable love of learning, given himself the very education that same world had sold to others for a fortune. He had not been robbed of his mind. He had guarded it in the dark until someone was finally humble enough to see it. If you understand tonight that no gift given in love is ever truly wasted, not the years a poor boy spends feeding his family, not the learning stolen in the dark for its own sake, type "Genius wears overalls" in the comments, because Gideon's whole hidden life is the proof of it, and there are more like him around you than you will ever guess. And the third thing he asked my people is where this story becomes far greater than one boy's justice. He did not ask only for his own place. He looked at the old professor.
And he said, how many others, how many boys and girls right now are mopping the floors of rooms they should be sitting in, driving the cars, selling the tea, carrying the loads, with minds like mine, or better, that this world will never once look at because they came in the wrong clothes? You almost lost me, Professor, and you only found me because a proud woman happened to mock me in front of a camera. How many are you losing quietly every year with no camera to catch it?
And that was his true request, the only reward he truly wanted, that the university go out deliberately into the poor schools and the forgotten places and the back corridors and look, actually look, for the next Gideon, for the fire in the mind that has no money behind it, to find them and fund them and open the door before poverty can fold up their future and hand them a mop, so that he, Gideon, would be the last great mind that place ever nearly threw away. And Professor Balogun, my people, wept openly now and said yes to all of it. And so it was done, and the ending is sweeter and stranger than the revenge you wanted, because it is real. Gideon took his place at last in the daylight, and he was of course extraordinary, but no more extraordinary in the lecture hall than he had already been alone in it at night. The only thing that changed was that now the world could see. Within a few short years, the locked-out cleaner was the pride of the very faculty that had turned him away, his name spoken with awe in the rooms he had once only mopped. And Professor Yuwande. She was not disgraced, because Gideon would not have it, and that mercy did more to her than any disgrace could have. She had to live, instead, with the knowledge of what she had done and to whom, and she had to watch the young man she had mocked rise with grace without ever once mocking her back. And it changed her, my people, slowly, the way only being shown mercy you did not earn can change a person. The pride cracked. She began, awkwardly at first, then truly, to see the people she had always looked through, the cleaners, the clerks, the quiet ones at the back. She became in her later years known as much for her humility as for her brilliance, and known above all for one thing, that no one in her classroom was ever invisible again. She would tell her students plainly that the finest mathematician she had ever met had once emptied her bins, and that she had nearly laughed him out of the room, and that the shame of it had made her, at last, into a teacher worth the name. And that program, my people, the one Gideon asked for, it went out into the poor places and the forgotten schools, year after year, looking for the fire in the mine that had no money behind it, and it found them. Boys and girls who would have been lost, who would have been handed a mop, who would have solved great problems alone in the dark, and died unknown, found and funded, and walked in through the front door. There was one girl in particular, my people, that Gideon always spoke of afterward, the first one the program ever found. A girl who sold groundnuts at a motor park to help her family, who did sums in her head faster than the drivers could cheat her, and who had never once dreamed a place like the university could be for someone like her. When they found her and told her she had earned a full place, fees and all, she did not believe them. She thought it was a cruel joke and nearly ran. It was Gideon himself who went to her, in his good clothes now, and crouched down by her tray of groundnuts the way no professor ever would, and told her his own story, the bins, the blackboards, the mop, and said,
I stood outside that door for years. I am not going to let it stay shut for you.
And he walked that girl in through the front entrance himself, past the very hall where a woman had once mocked him, and he watched her sit down in a seat that was truly, finally hers. And he said later that in all his life, all the great problems he ever solved, all the honors he ever won, nothing ever felt like watching that groundnut girl take her seat. Every one of them, though they never knew it, was let in by a young man in blue overalls who had once been left outside, and who, given at last the power to shut doors on others, chose instead to spend it flinging them open. If this story reached somewhere real in you tonight, if you have ever been locked out of a room you had earned, or judged by your uniform instead of your mind, or given up your own dream so someone you love could keep theirs, then do not leave this family without joining it first. Subscribe now so the next story finds you the very night it lands. And tell me, in the comments, what city, what country is this story reaching you in tonight? From Lagos to London, from Accra to Atlanta, from Nairobi to New York. I want to see just how far this one has traveled. And do not go yet, because there is already another story waiting for you, right there on your screen, another treasure the world mistook for nothing, another mind it judged by the wrong things. Because here is the truth I want you to carry home with you tonight, longer than any name in this story. The world sorts people by their clothes, their money, their accents, the letters after their names. And the world is a fool, my people, and it locks its greatest treasures outside the door every single day, and hands them a mop because they came dressed poor. Real intelligence was never the paper on the wall. It is the humility to look at what everyone knows and dare to ask whether it is true. And an education that teaches you to look down on the one who cleans your floor is not education at all. It is the most expensive ignorance money can buy. Talent, my people, is scattered evenly across the poor and the rich alike. It is only opportunity that is hoarded. For every gifted child born into comfort and carried gently to a great desk, there is another, just as bright or brighter, born into want and quietly handed a mop. And the only difference between them was never the mind, but the money. A just world would go hunting for those hidden ones as if for buried gold, because that is exactly what they are. Instead, our world walks past them every day, sees the overalls, and looks away. Never, ever look through a human being because of the work of their hands. The young man emptying your bin may carry a finer mind than yours, a heavier burden, and a purer love of learning than your degrees ever gave you. And the truest measure of your own intelligence is not how far you can look down on others, it is how clearly and how humbly you can see them. Until next time, my people, judge no one by their overalls, for you cannot see the mind or the sacrifice beneath them. Fling open the doors you are given the power to shut. And remember always that the most brilliant person in any room may well be the one holding the mop, and whether you ever find that out depends entirely on whether you were humble enough to look.